Hey everybody, this is Garrett with Earth and Time coming to you from a very stormy East Texas where I'm at the Caddo Burial Mounds historic site, somewhere that's been on my bucket list since I moved here to Texas. I'm about 2 hours outside of Houston, about northeast of Houston, just a bit outside of a town called Crockett, Texas, named after the famous Davy Crockett. And here they have the State Historic Park where there's a series of these mounds that were built between about 850 AD to 1300 AD that was the burial site and sacred area for the Caddo indigenous people. So let's go take a tour of the museum, learn more about the indigenous people that lived in this area and their history, and then go take a look at some of the sites out here in this thunderstorm. So let's get to it. Welcome to the Caddo Mound Museum. We're about 26 miles outside of Crockett, Texas, which I believe is the biggest town in this area. And this museum is all based around this old site where the indigenous Caddo people lived. To get an idea exactly where we're at, here is a map that shows Texas, and we're located here where this yellow dot is at. Here's Louisiana, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. Historically, the Caddo people occupied much of what is northeastern Texas, but eventually they were displaced and ended up in Oklahoma on the reservations there. The site we're going to learn about today was occupied from 800 AD to about 1350 AD, and the museum does a fantastic job of capturing what life would have been like for the Caddo people at around 1300 AD. The museum talks about the day-to-day life of the people, including how they raised corn, and they actually had two different types of corn. They had a eating corn, they called it sweet corn, and then they had what they called the great corn, which they made flour out of for other materials. And here's a board talking about just that, how they pounded the corn into a meal. Now, the people lived inside of grass huts. Inside the museum, they have a replica of one of the Caddo houses, and you can walk in here and get an idea of what they think one looked like based on descriptions. And one thing becomes apparent is that these are kind of large, and the elders and the leaders of the village and other people would actually have a much larger grass house, but a typical grass house would have some beds that were raised, as we can see in this artist's depiction. They'd have an area for food storage, and you'll see things like squash and corn and nuts and berries were very common types of food, as well as game. And you'll notice these pots. So there's actually Caddo pottery. That was a famous type of pottery that they traded with other tribes across the greater southeastern United States to the Great Plains. So what did they actually trade? Well, the Caddo people here that would have occupied the site here at the Caddo Mounds State Park were known as phenomenal bow makers, a tradition that's still carried on in Oklahoma today. But there's a specific type of wood here called bois d'arc wood, or what is known as the native Osage orange tree. And there were such skilled bow makers that other tribes across the plains and the southeastern US and Texas would all trade for that wood and their bows. And they would trade things like flint, which were used for arrowheads, of course, buffalo salt for preservation and taste for food. They had copper, they had greenstone, and they had seashells. And the trade would occur using these leather bags. And you can see seashells on the right and some salt on the left. The Caddo people also used various types of jewelry and paint and tattoos to express themselves. And the men kept their heads mostly shaven with one long piece of hair that would go down their back. So they keep basically like a mohawk on top, and then they'd braid feathers into it, and they'd have long hair down their back. Now the tribal leaders would have some kind of ceremonial stick or staff representing that they were tribal leaders, and you can see an example of that adornment that I was talking about before, where the Caddo people would paint themselves or have tattoos along with necklaces. Here's some replicas of the pottery, which was pretty beautiful. Look at the detail on that. And here are basically gauge earrings, for those of you familiar with that concept. So these would go inside their ear and they'd slowly expand these, or the incised ear spools, until they would have those as basically earrings. And then also here's a conch shell bead necklace. And all these, I believe, were found inside of the burial mound here when they were excavating it. Eventually the Caddo people were moved off of their ancestral lands here in the eastern Texas and eventually moved to Oklahoma from down here. This is where we're at now. And eventually they were moved and displaced into what was then the Indian Territories, but became known as Oklahoma. So we can go take a tour around the property here, go see some of the mounds. I will warn you right now that it is pretty stormy outside, so I'm going to do my best to get around and see everything. Got caught in the middle of a thunderstorm while I was visiting the museum here, so let's go see what we can see and see if we can stay dry. So now that we've taken a tour inside the museum, I want to come outside and show you what this area looks like. They have a recreation of one of the grass houses, and you can actually see one of the mounds off in the distance there. And there's actually 3 mounds that are located across this park. And we can see those mounds located here. So we're just leaving the visitor center, and you see that you are here. There is to our right, actually, number 5, the burial mound, which is the big mound we can see on the other side of the grass hut. There is number 2, which is the high temple mound, which we can see on the other side of the road and we're not able to go to. And there's the number 3 on there, which is the low platform mound, which we can see across this field. Now, it is pretty stormy and rainy out here. I'm going to do my best to get around to all these spots for you all to see what we can learn about the Caddo people and about this ancient site. So as we work our way around, I've really enjoyed being inside of that museum. It's very well done. Apparently it got destroyed by a tornado, maybe in a storm not too dissimilar to this one. And they rebuilt it and did a phenomenal job talking about the Caddo culture and creating a building where you can learn a lot about these indigenous people. So one of the reasons this site was located here is that we're just next to what's known as the Natchez River, which, if you can see those trees in the distance, that's about where the Natchez River was at. And this is basically kind of a north-south flowing river. And there's a series of springs in this area. And with all of those resources, that allowed the Caddo people to set up a community here where at one time they think there was over 150 homes, as well as the burial mound, and then the high temple mound, and then the low temple mound. All right, working my way into the grass hut. Now, as you can see, it's quite flooded here, but we're going to work our way in anyway, so here we go. All right, so I made it into the grass house, and I will say, with the storm outside, this is a nice reprieve from that crazy weather out there. Now, to get in here, I had to cross a little bit of a lake, so that was an adventure in and of itself, but I'm excited to be able to come into this recreation of one of these homes. And I'm in the middle of this thunderstorm, and 2 things. One, it's actually pretty quiet in here and really cozy, and you can imagine when the Caddo people had something like this and a storm like this, they'd be able to have a fire in here. They would be able to stay warm and stay out of the elements. So from the door I entered, they do have a rack up here with what looks like a deer skin, which was something I'm sure was pretty commonly used. They had shelves put in here, as well as some wood stacked to the side. And you can really get an idea about the size of this. I'm pretty impressed. This has to be somewhere about 15 or 20 feet radius from the center. So quite a bit of room in here. And you can imagine a family living in this and actually being quite comfortable and staying quite dry on a day like today. So from the doorway, I wanted to show the burial mound again. And I can pan to the left here, which I believe is towards the south, and we can see the low platform as well. From the grass house, we're going to work our way to the burial mound and take a look at that and see what it has to say. And then I may have to get out of here pretty quick because there's some pretty intense lightning off in the distance. As I count, it seems to be a couple miles away, so I'm going to go check out this mound and then book it back. So I'm starting to approach this mound. Pretty fascinating to think that there were hundreds, if not thousands, of the Caddo people that were living here between that time period of about 800 AD and 1350 AD. So we've now made it to the burial mound. It says the burial mound is about 20 feet tall and 90 feet in diameter. And starting in 1939, they did a series of excavations on it. Apparently this burial mound was used for a period of over 700 years, and it contains about 90 bodies, almost 100 people interred here. Now I'm wondering if those were just kind of the chiefs and the village leaders and maybe shamans that would be here. But what they found here as well was they found things like stone and copper ornaments, along with fine locally made ceramics that were left inside of the mound as well. So when this was excavated in 1939, I'm not sure what happened to all the artifacts. I hope they made it back to the Caddo people that are in Oklahoma. Unfortunately, that was a much different time, and I'm not sure if they ended up in museums. I know the museum here only has replicas. They don't have any of the original, which I appreciate. So if anybody knows more about that, please comment down below. The other thing that's important about where I'm actually standing is I'm actually along what's known as the El Camino de los Tejas, or the El Camino Real. And this was a major thoroughfare for the Spanish and for many others, but they actually used the old Caddo trails here in East Texas to help set up the El Camino Real that went from Louisiana all the way down into Mexico, or present-day Mexico. From the burial mound, which is by far the most impressive mound in the area, I can pan over towards, I believe, the south here, and we can see the low-rise hill and then the high platform off in the distance. Now, unfortunately, with how bad the rain is getting, I'm going to have to cut my walk around this area a little bit short, but I did want to show those to you. And let's go inside, and let's go back inside the museum and talk a bit more about the work they did and how they were able to identify all the homes that are actually sitting underneath this field. From the burial mound, which is by far the most impressive mound in the area, I can pan over towards, I believe, the south here, and we can see the low-rise hill and then the high platform off in the distance. Now, unfortunately, with how bad the rain is getting, I'm going to have to cut my walk around this area a little bit short, but I did want to show those to you. And let's go inside, and let's go back inside the museum and talk a bit more about the work they did and how they were able to identify all the homes that are actually sitting underneath this field. Hopefully I can make it back here on a less blustery day. So how did they find out about the village that was here, and how they have an idea about what the population was at its heyday? Well, they can use imagery, and this is electromagnetic imagery, and what we can see are those circular features on there, and those are the remnants of where the grass houses would have been at the site. And this shows the composite electromagnetic image across the whole state historic site. Now, it's hard to tell from the scale we're looking at here, but we can pull these out, and then what they did is they've actually showed where the different mounds are. So here's mound number 1, and these little blue dots are some features that they found, and there's the low platform mound and the burial mound. And so they found some interesting features, but what's really fascinating is we can take a look where those other interesting features are. They're not exactly sure what they were, but these red circles on here are all footprints of where there were homes. So there is quite the population living. You can see really close to the high temple. Look at all those, would have been grass houses there, kind of working down this strip on the other side of what was known, or what is known as Highway 21. And then we're at where we walked out to the burial mound. Up here, you can see there's not a lot of grass homes here, but if you get a little ways away from there, there's a whole series of other grass houses, and there's probably some that were here, but because of the road and construction, we probably lost some of that evidence. And here's a little bit more information about how they were looking at and excavating and trying to understand how the homes were built, what were the mounds. And this is work they did in the 1930s and then again in the 1960s, and then all the way up to present day, looking at the electromagnetic signatures that we just looked at. So as I stand inside the museum in front of the recreation of what this village could have looked like, or likely look like according to an artisan and from descriptions, I want to thank you all for joining me today to check out the Caddo Mounds historic site. Really fascinating. I wish we could have made it to some of the other platforms. Maybe I'll come back again on hopefully a nicer day than today, and we can go visit those other spots. If you want more information about this site, I'll put the link to the state historic site down below, the website, and you can learn more about the Caddo people as well as about this amazing place. So thank you again for joining me today. If you all enjoyed this video, you all know what to do by this time. Take care, and see you all in the next adventure. Rainbow in the distance.